Perfect.
Only one information for you. Maybe sometimes you will feel that video is not so perfect. It's because we are now broadcasting from 3 different continents. Scott is in New York, as I know, and Jindra is in Prague, and I'm in Vietnam. So sorry for that, and don't make yourself disturbed by that. So Scott, we are continue with questions. We have some topics which are very important for Czech people. So thank you very much for being with us, and for all of us who are watching, you can discuss everything. Just debate under this video. You can write comments. It's okay. You can talk. You can just say your opinion.
Denis Pushilin, who's the head of the Donetsk People's Republic, he in June was in St. Petersburg at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is the St. Petersburg Economic Forum is organized by the Office of the President of Russia. That means Vladimir Putin. Okay, sort of his thing. It's his big moment. So when Pushilin travels to St. Petersburg on Russian soil at an event hosted by the Russian president, and he's going to speak about matters of joint concern between the Donetsk People's Republic and Russia, one needs to be fairly certain that he has pre-cleared his positions. And he said a couple things. One, that he doesn't believe the special military operation will be over until the end of the year. So anybody who thinks this is going to end in August, September, October, no, it's going to end closer to December, maybe pour over into January, February timeframe. And the reason it's going to take that long is because they're going to be taking territory that goes beyond the Donbass. They're going to basically, that Russia can never again trust Ukraine to govern Russians. Logical, since the Ukrainians have empowered neo-Nazi nationalists who view the Russians as orcs, subhumans, who have passed laws banning Russian culture, Russian literature, Russian language. I mean, close your eyes for a second. You guys are Europeans. You know the ugly history of Europe. You know the ugly history of anti-Semitism in Europe. So close your eyes for a second and listen to someone says that I am banning the Russian language. I am banning Russian culture. Now imagine for a second, they said, I'm banning the Jews. I'm banning Jewish culture. I'm banning the Hebrew language. I'm banning, wow, sounds eerily like what was going on back in the 1930s in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. War is complicated business. You need a lot of, you need approvals, and there can be serious domestic backlash. And remember, even though Putin was confident that Russia would win the economic game, war, boomerang the sanctions back, there was no guarantees that was going to happen. And if there was severe economic fallout in Russia that generated some domestic unrest, you don't want to reinforce that unrest by mobilizing for war. So I think the Russians have been very clever and very careful in their approach. But the other thing that means is that they haven't even come close to tapping their capability. So anybody who thinks that Russia is bleeding themselves out in Ukraine and will not be able to stand up to NATO once this conflict is over, wrong. The Russian military is untapped. There's still a lot of it left. And more importantly, the Russians are rotating units through. They're all getting combat experience in large-scale ground combat in Ukraine, invaluable experience NATO doesn't have. So if there's ever a conflict between NATO and Russia, understand this. Your Czech battalions who don't know anything about war, don't know how to fight war, don't know what war is like, probably don't train very well either because you have budgetary issues. They're going to be going up against Russian equivalents who have perfected the art of war. And you know what the art of war is? I don't mean to be too blunt. It's about killing. It means the Russians are very good at killing people. And if the Czechs want to fight the Russians will be very good at killing the Czechs. They'll be very good at killing Germans, very good at killing Poles, because they've perfected this. NATO hasn't. Your troops right now are sitting on their butts in barracks playing video games. The Russians are out in the field right now killing Ukrainians. You tell me which one's preparing them better for war. The Russians right now they're very realistic. They're very pragmatic, and they're very mature in their response. But let's never forget for a second that this is a very capable military, the Ukrainian military. Very large, 260,000 regular troops, 600 to 700,000 reserves. Their regular forces were trained and equipped to NATO standards. Let me put it this way. If the Ukrainian military went to war against Czech Republic, they'd crush you in a second. They'd overrun the country. If they went to war against Germany, they beat the Germans in a stand-up fight every day of the week. There's not an army in Europe to beat the Ukrainians. They're that good. But Russia's not willing to suffer the casualties, generate the dramatic success. The art of war that Russia has perfected is the art of large-scale positional warfare, meaning that they have allowed the battlefield to become defined. That this isn't about grand maneuvering. This isn't about tanks sweeping here, there, and everywhere. They've allowed the battlefield to become very defined, so it's very conducive to an artillery duel. So there's a lot of firepower being brought to bear. And the Russians are winning this artillery duel hands down. Listen to the testimony of the mercenaries who are coming back. It's amazing what they say. We never saw a Russian. We never saw a Russian. We just sat in our trenches and got blown up. They killed everybody and we never saw a Russian till we retreated. They don't need their best tanks. They don't need their best equipment. That stuff's best kept in reserve in case NATO thinks they really want to fight Russia. And remember what Putin said. You think you can beat us? Why don't you try? And if you try, you're going to go up against the varsity. I don't know if they have that term in Europe or not, but in American high schools, we have the junior varsity, which are the players who aren't as good. They need to get a little bit more skill, so they play on the junior varsity team. Then we have the varsity, big boys, the guys that can play that know how to play. Russia's the varsity. Europe's JV. You don't stand a chance. You think you can fight the Russians? I wouldn't advise it, because they're experienced. They've perfected the art of war, and they're not using their best assets, as you rightly pointed out. They're using some good ones. I don't think we should denigrate the quality of the Russian forces there, but they've kept enough quality in reserve that if NATO wants to play hook and jab, the Russians can play that game as well.
Do you want to add something, Andre?
No, I think we can move to another question. I think it was like all very precisely answered. So let's move to another topic, because we have a lot of them left.
So next question. The Czech Republic and other European countries are buying F-35 aircraft, which serve as carriers of nuclear warheads. Could this lead Putin to become more aggressive, or is it just a defensive gesture? What do you think, Scott?
Can I just like first question, like prequel, like what do you think about buying F-35s? Because we had 14 Gripens in our military, and right now we are buying 24 F-35s. And basically, we need to refurbish everything, because first of all, it costs us 80 billion Czech crowns, which is something about $4 billion US, and it's much more heavier aircraft. We need to reconstruct our airports, military airports. I mean, because the F-35s are much more heavy than Swedish Gripens. We need to completely train new staff. Like both they are caring about the planes and the pilots. It's much more costly, like 3.5 half more costly, like running these F-35s than the Gripens. And in the end, like everybody says that the F-35s are too slow and they are just good for as the warhead carriers, but nothing else. So what do you think about these planes, and if it is like smart move, or how do you evaluate this?
The F-35 is one of the worst fighters the United States has ever produced. It doesn't work. If you're an F-35 pilot, you're going to die. If you're a Czech who thinks he's going to fly the F-35 to fame and glory, you're not. It's not a stealth airplane. It's going to be detected and shot down instantaneously. Its electronics don't work. It's a very difficult aircraft to maintain. It has a high failure rate, the engine. You're going to, even if you're not at war, you're going to go bankrupt maintaining it. I challenge the Czech Air Force to have a 40% combat availability rate. You won't. That means 4 out of every 10 airplanes are able to fly. You're not going to get that because the plane sucks. It's horrible. Even the U.S. Congress, who is notorious about throwing money after weapon systems, starting to wake up to the fact that this is a lemon, a giant lemon. It's a huge mistake. It's suicide to try and fly this airplane in combat. Suicide. Now you talk about its nuclear capable. The F-35A is a nuclear capable platform. That means that it's been certified to operate the B-61 air delivered nuclear bomb. That is the weapon of choice for NATO at this point in time. What's the danger here? The danger is if you study the history of arms control between the Soviet Union, United States, and then Russia and the United States, the Russians have always complained about this ridiculous NATO policy. I mean, let me ask you this. Does Czechoslovakia have nuclear weapons?
Nope.
Are you a nuclear power?
Zero.
No. Right. But you're going to have F-35As, which according to the new NATO nuclear doctrine makes you a nuclear power, because every NATO member who has an F-35A now has a nuclear capable platform that NATO expects you to use in a nuclear role come war. Now, the Russians have always said, we talk about the French and the British having nuclear weapons, but why do you have nuclear weapons in Germany, and why do you require Germany to have the Tornado, the nuclear? Because in wartime, the German aircraft are going to deliver nuclear weapons. Why do we have nuclear weapons in Turkey? Is Turkey a nuclear power? No, but there's American nuclear weapons in Turkey that'll be turned over to the Turkish Air Force during time of war to drop on the Russian enemy. The Russians have always said that this is a horribly irresponsible policy. And it complicates disarmament because NATO refuses to, because when the United States negotiates with Russia, we negotiate about American nuclear capability and Russian nuclear capability. The Russians keep saying, but wait a minute, all those B-61 bombs there, they're American. We say, no, they're NATO. They're not NATO, they're American. But the bottom line is, if the Czech Republic acquires the F-35A, understand that from the Russian perspective, I mean, how many did you say you're going to buy? 24?
24.
Yeah. 34? 24?
24.
24. The Russians view that as 24 nuclear weapons delivery platforms, which means Russia now will target them accordingly, which means the Czech Republic is now going to be targeted by Russian nuclear weapons. Right off the bat, you're going to be now automatically part of the Russian nuclear target deck. Hey, congratulations, Czech people. Did you think about that when you bought these airplanes? You live in Prague? You thought Prague's a beautiful city, lots of culture? You're nothing but a nuclear target. And if you go to war against Russia, in addition to getting your military crushed on the battlefield, if it goes nuclear, your city's gone. All of Czechoslovakia, or all of the Czech Republic's gone. Because you decided you wanted to play nuclear games. Well, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and you just won the dumbest prize of all. An airplane that doesn't work and a nuclear doctrine that guarantees your country will be destroyed in time of war. It's just stupid. It's the worst mistake you could have made. You would have been better off buying more Gripens, because at least they can take off and engage in a dogfight without any of the stupidity of American-driven NATO nuclear policy attached to it.
It's crazy.
Yeah, strictly said. Honestly, Scott, thank you very much for answering. Next question is do you think, Scott, that would the course of the conflict be different if Trump were in power?
Donald Trump ran on a platform of, hey, why can't we be friends with Russia? I liked it. I like that approach. I can't say I'm the biggest Donald Trump fan in the world, but I like that. You know, he asked some other relevant questions like, why do we have NATO? You know, the Cold War ended 30 years ago. Why do we still have NATO? What's the purpose of this organization? And even if you guys think it wants it, why are we paying for it? Why doesn't NATO carry its own weight? These are great questions. I like these questions. But the problem is that Donald Trump, you know, he won the 2016 election under a cloud created by the Democratic Party, a cloud based upon misinformation of an election stolen by Russia on behalf of Donald Trump. And this led to the Democratic-controlled Congress, House of Representatives, launching investigation after investigation against him in an effort to stymie his presidency.
The Mueller.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, so, you know, here's a guy that said he ran on a platform of, why can't we be friends with Russia? And instead he became, I'm the president who is tougher against Russia than any other president. I've imposed more sanctions against Russia, which shows that Donald Trump was fundamentally a weak person when it came to Russia, that he couldn't follow through with his, you know, with his goal of being friends with Russia, that he was, that he bent to the pressure placed on him by Congress and domestic American politics, which is, you know, very Russophobic in nature. So here's a guy that has to be the tough guy, has to be the winner, has to, you know, be, you know, I'm Donald Trump. I'm the American president. I don't back down from anybody. How would he have responded in this situation? I don't know. I would like to believe that he wouldn't have allowed the aggressive posturing that led to this conflict. I would have liked to believe that he would have been more open to receiving the Russian you know, proposals regarding a new European security framework. I would like to believe he would have been more questioning of, you know, NATO's expansion, things of this nature, so that maybe we could have avoided this. But what would he have done once Russia crossed the border? Would he have been, you know, the pragmatic president that says we're not going to do anything, or would he have been the tough guy president that said we got to, you know, raise the stakes, so we've got to escalate. We can't let this stand. We can't let Russia get away with this. I don't know. But it couldn't have been as bad as what Biden has done. I mean, you know, Biden has totally fumbled this across the board. Maybe Trump would have fumbled it differently. We'll never know. We'll never know.
Just a follow-up question is, do you think there is like any chance that the upcoming midterm elections in the United States would change the situation? Do they have any impact on this? Because it's not about the government, but it could shift the powers from Democrats to Republicans or something like that. Could this have any impact on the Ukrainian war?
Well, as I said, Russophobia runs deep in the American DNA right now, especially the political DNA. You know, Republicans and Democrats have voiced their outrage over the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's largely bipartisan support for the provision of military aid. So Republicans taking over Congress in and of itself doesn't seem to be a formula for policy change. But here's the big but. There was an American political consultant named James Carville, the Raging Cajun, who advised Bill Clinton in the 1992 election. And Bill Clinton, very smart man, was a policy wonk. He wanted to talk policy, foreign policy, all day long. And Carville went to him and said, no. It's the economy, stupid. That's all you have to worry about is the economy, and you'll win the election. The reason why the Republicans are going to gain control of the Congress is because of the economy. 78% of Americans are unsatisfied with how Joe Biden has performed economically. It's not because of abortion. It's not because of gun rights. It's not because of Ukraine. It's not even because of crime. It's because of the economy. And so if you're a Republican who has just gained political power because of economic concerns, you may be inclined to focus on changing policies that have a detrimental impact to the American economy. And these sanctions against Russia are just mind-numbingly dumb. they're stupid, they're counterproductive. And I think that even if the Republicans don't support the Russian invasion or never will cheerlead Putin, they have been empowered by an American public that expects them to do something to address the economic situation. And I do believe that that could lead to a softening of the American posture vis-a-vis Russia when it comes to economic sanctions. Not because we suddenly fell in love with Russia, but because the American people are demanding that something be done to end, this economic downturn that's taking place largely because of our policies against Russia.
Since we touched this, I just have one question. What is your opinion about the sanctions? Because right now we have record prices of gas. So, like, what do you think about the sanctions? Because there are, we had some economic experts here who are saying that the sanctions are more targeted on us than on Russia. That it's damaging, much more damaging us than Russia. So, what is your take on this?
Yeah, the sanctions were literally the dumbest thing that Europe could do. Because, first of all, if you're going to say we're going to free ourselves, liberate ourselves from Russian energy, I mean, that sounds great. That's the kind of stuff that politicians run on, especially when you have a population that's been pre-programmed to dislike the Russians. So you say, we're going to free ourselves of our addiction to Russian energy. Wow, I'll vote for you. But where are we going to get the gas that's going to replace the Russian gas? We have a plan. The Americans have given us guarantees that they're going to be able to provide sufficient energy backup so that it will be a seamless transition from the Russian energy to whatever we're going to. Plus, there's this whole green thing. We got the renewable energy. This will be a great opportunity for us to invest in renewables. We can accelerate our reduction of our carbon footprint. This is all good stuff. None of it came true. I mean, look at Germany, one of the greenest countries out there. They're powering up the notoriously carbon effusive coal plants because they don't have any other option because they divorced themselves from Russian energy. There is no plan B. No plan B. That's a political failure right there. You don't begin a fight that you don't know how you're going to get out of. So why would Europe rush into this? Because they're cowards, because they're useless politicians, because they're America's poodle. We basically said jump. They said how high. Nobody asked the question why. Why are we jumping? What's the purpose of this? And the other thing is, if you're going to do something, for God's sake, don't telegraph it a year and a half advance of doing it. I mean, we're going to punish Russia with unprecedented sanctions. They've never seen anything like this. We're going to do things like cut them off from SWIFT banking system. We're going to divorce ourselves of Russian energy. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. And the Russians are going, please tell me more. What are you going to do? And then the Russians simply gathered around and said, all right, here's their battle plan. They've given it to us, thankfully. How do we respond to that? How do we prepare ourselves for this? You know who is prepared for sanctions? Russia. They had a plan B. They had a plan C. They had a plan D. People said if we cut Russia off from Europe, Russia can't exist without the European market. You've heard that. Without the European market, Russian energy will collapse. Really? That's why they ran a $150 billion surplus last quarter? Russian energy market's not collapsing. Europe's collapsing. Look how smart the Germans are. I mean, geniuses, those Germans. We always thought they were pretty good, but apparently they're not. They won't buy energy from Russia. So Russia sells the oil to India. Then India sells it back to Germany at twice the price. So Germany's getting Russian oil, but they're paying 2 times as much. Wow. Genius. And look at the price of gas. I would imagine, again, I haven't been in, last time I was in Prague was in the mid 2000s, 2005, around there. Beautiful city, by the way. But I think Prague, when I saw it, had a good standard of living, high standard of living. It was a modern industrial state. What do you think helped make that possible? Do you think that cheap Russian gas helped make this possible? I'm not saying it's the only thing, but I think cheap Russian gas helped make a lot of this possible because you were getting gas at a 20 to 50% discount on the international market. Imagine if you had to pay twice as much for gas throughout the early 2000s. Would you have a lot of money left over to make your lifestyle what it was? Or do you think maybe the quality of life in the Czech Republic would have diminished somewhat because you had to pay more for energy? You've been living a good lifestyle because of the availability of cheap Russian gas. So is a lot of Europe. Now it's gone. Look at the prices of gas. They're up. And when the price of gas goes up, the price of fuel goes up. What are you paying for diesel in Europe right now? Because in America it's insane.
It's unbelievable. We have liters, not gallons, but we are paying record prices. It's like it's crazy what we are paying. So I would need to calculate it to gallons because
I don't need to know the exact price, but you're paying more, a lot more.
For sure.
Okay, and that basically reflects on everything because I imagine you guys have trucks and truck drivers that deliver stuff from factories to the stores. These truck drivers are now paying through the nose for the diesel they need to move their trucks. That means that they're going to transfer that cost to the goods to the store, who's going to transfer it to the consumer. Again, it's all anecdotal, but my wife and I go to the supermarket to buy food. I can guarantee you that we're paying twice as much for food now than we were before this crisis. The food prices are insane here, insane, and they're only going up. I would imagine that's happening to you too. Now, I'll ask you a personal question. You don't have to answer, but I'd like your audience to reflect on this. What's your paycheck look like?
Well,
has it gone up 23%?
No.
Probably not. Probably flat. Probably like mine, flat, maybe even a little less because of diminished economic opportunity. Your paycheck is flatlining, but the cost of everything is going through the roof, which is in effect meaning you're earning less money right now. Your quality of life is reducing because you can't afford it. That's what's happening here. This was the most predictable thing ever. I don't want to brag, but I wrote an article in November, and then I repeated it in December, where I said the sanctions will boomerang back on Europe. They will destroy the European economy, and they will destroy the politicians who voted in favor of this. I said that in November and December, which means this was a predictable event. This should not have taken the West by surprise. And this is why your politicians have to be held doubly accountable, because this isn't a mistake. This is a deliberate act of economic suicide by politicians who didn't have the courage to tell America to stick it in its ear.
Yeah, well, one last additional questions to this. What do you think about the role of China? Because Putin was in Beijing on 4th of February, signing the agreement. Do you see this as like a smart game played by China, or it's like standing out of this conflict and just making trades with everybody, or what is the role of China there?
If you think China's standing out of this conflict, you don't understand the role China plays in geopolitics today. China's on the side of Russia 100%. 100%. Now, Russia, everybody says, well, wait a minute, there's no Chinese troops in Ukraine. Russia doesn't want Chinese troops in Ukraine. There's no Chinese military equipment. Really, the best army in Europe needs Chinese military equipment? I don't think so. What Russia needs is continued access to the global economy that China provides. China is buying Russian energy. China is working with Russia to create alternative banking solutions. And this didn't just happen on February 4th. Putin and Xi Jinping have been developing a very effective personal relationship for some time now. I mean, go back and look at the videos of them celebrating each other's birthdays. I mean, these are true friends who get together, celebrate their birthdays together. And this isn't, you look at the next time the American president visits Europe. Maybe he'll come to the Czech Republic. I don't know. But when he meets with your leaders, it's all very stilted. There's the handshake and the fake smile, and then they move on, and there's all this stuff going on between Putin and Xi. Ain't fake. It's real. It's a real friendship. It's genuine. And So February 4th didn't happen in a vacuum. February 4th is a byproduct of years of cultivation of friendship between the leaders of Russia and China China as nations. That's why when they say we're better than an alliance, we're stronger than an alliance, because an alliance is limited. Look at NATO, the NATO alliance. Look at the foundation of the NATO alliance. Article 5. Read Article 5 very carefully, because people keep saying that it's a guarantee of that people come to your defense. There ain't no guarantee there. It says if one nation's attacked, then all other nations will consider the circumstances of the event and what they can do, and their response doesn't have to be military in nature. The fact is, they don't have to respond at all. So that's your alliance. That's your great NATO alliance, which means that if you get involved in a war with Russia, let's say, for example, Romania provokes a fight with Russia over Moldova. And Romania says, I demand that Article 5 be enacted. I can guarantee you there's going to be a lot of NATO nations that go, nope, we ain't playing that game. You guys started that fight. Your problem. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And this will become even more so once the economy collapses. Because you know what's expensive? War. War is really expensive. And if you have an economy that's not functioning, how do you think you're going to fight a war? You're not. So the NATO alliance is actually very weak. The Russians and Chinese don't have a formal alliance, which means they can do whatever the hell they want to do. And right now, think about it. What has the United States been doing for the past 20 to 30 years? Sanctioning Russia, sanctioning China, threatening both with economic sanction after economic sanction, using this rules-based international order as a mechanism to beat both nations up, to try and build global alliances based upon, democracy versus autocracy type alignments. China's looking at what's happening to Russia and saying, that's what they have planned for us. So China can't allow the West to succeed against Russia in the Ukraine. China will guarantee that Russia wins because China understands that if Russia loses, all of that effort is going to be turned on China. The Chinese are very smart. They're very clever. They aren't looking for a fight, a military fight. They've been waging economic war, and it's not a war that they wanted to fight. Think about what's going on in the Pacific. What did the Obama administration do? They created something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. What was the purpose of the TPP? To gather all the economic powers of the Pacific together for a giant free trade treaty. Wait a minute, not all though. They were going to leave one out. Who are they going to leave out? Chinese. The whole idea was to bring everybody together to oppose the Chinese. And then Trump withdrew from it and it collapsed. What did China do in response? They came in and they brought all those nations together in the world's largest free trade agreement. And guess who's not a member? United States. The Chinese flipped the narrative. They're smarter than we are. They're smarter than Europe is. Look at Europe. I mean, the G7, primarily Europe. Japan gets to play. What did the G7 do 2 years ago? Remember Biden came in because, the G7 is nothing more than an adjunct of the United States of America. I'm sorry, Europe. You guys suck as a continent because you don't count for anything. You're just an American stooge, an American poodle. And Biden came to the G7 in Cornwall, England, and said, hey, I got this great thing I'm doing at home called Build Back America, Build Back Better plan. I want to sell it to you. I want you guys to vote for the Build Back World plan, Build Back Better World, BBBW. And G7 went, okay, what are we doing with this? We're taking on the Chinese. We're taking on the Belts and Roads Initiative. We're going to counter this. BRI, Belts and Roads Initiative, Chinese policy since 2010, supported about $7 trillion worth of economic development into the third world, bridges, infrastructure, ports, airports. What was BBBW supposed to do? Counter. We're going to take on the Chinese. The Chinese, who have a 10-year head start, have already invested $7 trillion in developing a global infrastructure development plan. And the G7 in the United States are going to overcome that in a year. First of all, they couldn't get the plan off the ground. Nothing happened. So this most recent meeting of the G7, they came up with a different plan. Now they have $200 billion. They're going to just call it $600 billion because $400 billion is supposed to come from private investors, but no private investors going to invest in this. It's a joke. $200 billion to go up against $7 trillion, not going to happen. This is the reality. China has outcompeted everybody. They do it better than everybody. And the Chinese victory will be economic because what is G7? It's a joke. It's a collective of collapsing economies thanks to the sanctions. What's the counter to G7? BRICS. You know, BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Wait, we get to add Iran. Wait, there's one more, Argentina. Wait, others want to play Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Basically, the whole world wants to play with BRICS. Nobody wants to play with the G7 anymore. Right now, the G20 is having a conference in October. They can't, I think November maybe, in Indonesia. They can't agree on anything. They can't get a joint statement out. But what is the G20? Subtract the G7 from the G20, and you got BRICS. Really. And that's the future of the world. And China and Russia are directing the future of the world. China's on Russia's side. Russia's on China's side. That's just the way it is.
Thanks everyone for sharing. Maybe this sounds has some little issue now. I hope it's working. So next question for you, Scott, is a very interesting one. And it's in 2021, the Pandora Papers case was leaked and Zelensky appears to have been involved. Do you think that the investigation is still ongoing, or was it swept off the table as part of the war?
Well, first of all, the Pandora Papers were the byproduct of a journalistic investigation. It wasn't the byproduct of an investigation by some court of jurisdiction or nations. The United States not investigating them. Did the European Union call together a tribunal to investigate Zelensky? No. Nothing's happening with this right now. No journalist is talking about it anymore. Everybody's instead of investigating Zelensky for being, this corrupt money launderer who's pilfering the wealth of Ukraine for his own personal benefit. He's the modern day Winston Churchill. He's King Leonidas leading the 300 against the million-man immortals. He is Europe's hero. He is the definition of what democracy should be. He is defending democracy. I'd be a little insulted about that if I were the Czechs. You are a democratic nation, I believe. You function as one, and yet you're not a model of democracy in Europe. No, the most corrupt nation in the world is the model of democracy in Europe. This comedian president who before the war had 23% support and only sustained his power by banning political parties. How is that democratic?
Well, there's obviously one thing like what you said is just again a follow-up question. The thing is that right now, obviously, like when you asked why we are supporting this, it's because as you said that a lot of Americans are Russophobic. We are like one of the most Russophobic countries in the world because of 1968. Still a lot of people remember that, and our fathers were telling us that it was the saddest day of their life, and so on, which is completely understandable. But the world has turned, and I think a lot of people have not noticed. But when we talked about media, what do you think about the role of the media? Because there is like a lot of propaganda there. As I said, they are blocking websites here in the Czech Republic and all of the stuff, and there is just only one way of informing the people. There is no other no other informations are allowed at all, and everybody who says anything else is pro-Russian, is Russian agent, is Putin's agent, and so on and so on. And I just want to have like equal information, like objective information if possible. But this is not the case right now.
No, and I have to warn you that by having me on, you put yourself at risk because you can be deplatformed. I've been banned from Twitter. People who play interviews of me on YouTube find that these videos are taken down. And I've been labeled by the Ukrainian government as a Russian propagandist. I'm on that infamous blacklist that has been published by the Office of the Presidency. Which is just an absurd in the extreme. You don't have to agree with me. I don't expect everybody. The fact is, I always say when I talk, I say what I would like is everybody in the audience to view me as a Russian agent of disinformation, to treat everything I say with suspicion, so that you go out and you research it and you study it and you find out if I'm fact-based or not. Don't treat anything I say at face value. Question everything. That would be wonderful. But I've been called a Russian propagandist for three things. The website listed three things. One, that I dare say that Ukraine had become a NATO base. I mean, when you have a NATO base on your soil, Ukraine has become a NATO base. This is a statement of fact. Ukraine allowed the United States and NATO to put in permanent training installations. I believe some Czech troops rotated through there on occasion, which the United States said were, the one base in question. Every 55 days, the United States trained a battalion of Ukrainian troops and sent them east to kill Russians. That makes you a NATO base. End of story. Am I a Russian propagandist for telling the truth? Maybe if that's the definition of Russian propagandist, somebody who tells the truth, yep, count me in. I'm a Russian propagandist now. Yeah, and the other thing I was accused of is sustaining the narrative that the Bucha massacre was done by Ukrainian security forces and not Russia. The facts are clear on this one. The Ukrainian security forces did it. They pretty much admitted doing it, but now they've come back because the media doesn't allow questioning of official narratives. So here we have a case where the Ukrainians literally shot somebody, had the smoking gun in their hands, dropped the gun and said Russia did it, and everybody believed them, even though they know they shot the guys. I'm a Russian propagandist now for telling the truth about Putin, challenging the narrative. Then lastly, I called the conflict between Ukraine and Russia a proxy war between NATO and Ukraine. Imagine me saying that. What a horribly propagandist thing to say. Max Boot, a notorious Russophobe who writes for the Washington Post, a newspaper that does not like Russia, wrote an opinion piece earlier this month where he basically said that the Ukrainian conflict is a proxy conflict. Is he a Russian propagandist? When the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Lloyd Austin, speaking in Europe in May, says that the American policy objective for this war is to use the Ukrainians to bring pain to the Russians, to inflict harm on the white Russians, to weaken Russia. That is literally the definition of a proxy conflict. Is he a Russian propagandist? No. The thing is, all these other people are speaking out in a manner which supports the policy of defending Ukraine. I'm using truth to, that's a statement of fact. That doesn't make me a Russian propagandist. I mean, if I look outside and say it's raining and the rain's coming down, what? Am I a conspiracy theorist? No, I'm just stating a fact. Rain is falling from the sky. Now, I can make these assessments based upon my background and analytical capabilities. Journalists are very capable as well. There are some very good journalists in the West who know what I'm saying is true, but they can't earn a living by speaking the truth. I don't know what the situation is in the Czech Republic when it comes to your media. I have to be honest and say I'm not an expert on it. I would imagine that your media isn't state controlled. I imagine you have private TV stations, private newspapers, etc., but that they are responsive to legislation. That if your parliament passes certain laws and regulations, that they have to abide by them. Here in the United States, we don't do news anymore. That's not how it works. See, news is about informing people. News is an impartial, dispassionate recitation of facts. We don't do that. That's boring. We entertain. The job of what they call the so-called news networks today is to entertain people. And you entertain people by having headline-grabbing news. Breaking news. Everything's breaking news nowadays. Breaking news. Breaking news. Breaking news. Well, where do you get your breaking news from? I mean, sometimes things happen, that's breaking news, but more often than not, you're dependent upon the government to give you information of an inflammatory nature that then you can run to and say, this is breaking news. The irony is we know this is the case. The National Security Council has come out and said, we're declassifying intelligence information to feed it to the American media so they can shine a light on something to shape the narrative, even though we know what we're declassifying isn't true. Basically, the United States is putting lies out there to get into Putin's head through the vehicle of the American media. This is entertainment. It's not news. It's about money. You entertain so people watch. The more viewers you get, the higher revenue base you have for advertising dollars. Again, I don't know how the Czech media works, but I would imagine it's a similar model, that you're dependent upon advertising dollars, which means you're dependent upon viewership, subscriptions, which means you better have headline grabbing information. And that information better be a narrative that the government supports, because if the government doesn't support it, A, they stop feeding you information, and B, they start passing legislation which restricts your ability to promulgate that information. And then the other thing too, because all of this can be overcome by a citizen who has intellectual curiosity. We're really not prisoners of the media. We're not. Between this earlobe and this earlobe is this wonderful computer called the brain. And it enables each one of us to think independently. And we do have the ability to access information and then to ponder this information, to do more research. You don't even have to get off your butt and physically go to the library. You got Google. It gives you a library at your fingertips. So you can do the research yourself. And that's sort of the responsibility of a citizen, is to empower his or herself with knowledge and information so that they can better hold to account the people they elect to higher office. But that's not what we're doing. I don't know what the situation is in the Czech Republic. I think you're probably European, which means you're progressive. Do your people work more than a 40-hour work week regularly? Do you get vacations? I think you do. I think that's sort of the European thing. The French model. Maybe you want to go to the 4-day work week and take 2 months vacation. Who knows? But yeah, you have a good life. In America, we don't have that, guys. We don't have that. Families are working 2 full-time jobs just to stay afloat. Some of those jobs, people have to work, 60 hours, 80 hours, 100 hours a week just to get enough money to pay the bills. Vacations, what the hell is a vacation? Most Americans haven't seen a vacation in years. They can't afford a vacation. They got to live up to the expectations of the American dream. And what this means now is when they come home from work, they're exhausted physically and mentally. The last thing they want to do is turn on TV and be compelled to think. They don't want to think. They want to be entertained. You turn on TV to get your entertainment. And you're happy just sitting there being told what to think by the media. It's very comforting, you see, because now you can turn off the TV and go, oh, and then go to bed. It's a trap. It's a death trap. Now, I have some friends who are very smart people, very intelligent. And, in the lead up to the Iraq war, we would often go watch football, Monday Night Football in the local bar. Big thing in America, Monday Night Football. Your Europeans probably don't understand it. Do you have Monday Night Soccer? I don't know, but it's the equivalent. It's a big sport. We like to watch it. It's entertaining. But we would talk about it.
I'm doing the commentary of NFL in Czech TV for 13 years. So
there you go. So you understand the addiction. So we're watching the game, but I bring up the war because I was very public in my opposition to the war. And I would say, why aren't you guys, because they question me, say, why are you saying there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? I mean, the government's not saying that. Rush Limbaugh's not saying that. Why are you saying that? I said, guys, you know who I am, right? And you know what I've done. And then we talk about it and they say, well, you can have that position because that was your life. That was your work. You're knowledgeable. But we don't know this. We only know what we hear on TV. And I said, okay, but can't you do more? Can't you do research yourself? We don't have time, man. We work. Okay, I get it. Then the game starts. It's a good game. We get into the second quarter. It's close. And suddenly the coach calls, a sweep. Why the hell did you call a sweep? Statistically, that's a non-functioning play in this situation. On 3rd and 3, you should always go with the fullback going through the 2-hole. I'm like, why would you know this? Because we've studied the statistics. We subscribe to newspapers that have all the sports statistics. Say, wait a minute, you have time to study sports statistics, but you don't have time to study the details about a war that's going to put American lives at risk. Unfortunately, that's the situation we find ourselves in. We've allowed ourselves to become dumb. We allowed ourselves to disengage, and it's our fault. We can blame the media all we want, but we're the ones that make it possible.
Right.
What was to say to it? So, this is a question from Emily, and she's interested in your answer, Scott. How do you perceive the European Union and its influence on individual member states?
You're asking an American to comment about the European Union. First of all, what is the European Union? It's an economic union, right? The concept is to have this common economy, a common currency. When you join the European Union, you join the Euro market, I believe, right?
It's euro right now, but it's like you are joining common market, but then you have to fulfill certain criteria in order to be able to get euro as a currency.
And so my understanding is that, the notion when you say the European Union, people think of a singularity. Sort of like when they say Europe, that it's a homogeneous entity. The European Union. All Europeans are alike. All Europeans are the same. All European economies are the same, but they're not. They're not. Europe is, a byproduct of its constituent members. I believe that the economic reality in Spain is far different from the economic reality in Germany. I believe the economic reality in Greece is far different from the economic reality in, say, the Czech Republic. So you basically, in the European Union, you have the haves supporting the have-nots to create this illusion of balance. Here comes the problem. What happens when the haves no longer have? And that's happening right now because of the sanctions. What happens when these great economic powers that have been sustaining the European Union are no longer great economic powers? What happens when the economic engine that makes the myth of the European Union believable stops functioning? There's going to be a collapse. And already you're seeing in Europe today the gravitation away from a singularity that rotates around Strasbourg. I believe that's where the European seat of government for the European Union is in Strasbourg. I think it rotates to Brussels. I don't know. Again, I'm an American. I'm thousands of miles away. I'm very ignorant. But it's going away from the gravitation around the singularity of the European Union now to two differing economic approaches, one in Berlin, the other in Paris. The Berlin are the German bankers who are very conservative. Forgive me for a second. This happens when I talk too much. It's God's way of telling me to shut up. But is in Paris, where the French want to be more liberal with their spending. There's going to be a great debate, I think, in Europe about the future of the economic direction. And I don't think the European Union is going to survive because Europe isn't a singularity. Europe isn't homogeneous. And the glue that's held it together is the economic viability of the big European economic engines that are all stalling right now because of the economic sanctions imposed against Russia and the boomeranging effect. And if Europe is unable to resolve this issue, What is the future of the Europe? I think you're gonna start to see nations make a decision that it's better for them to pursue independent economic policy than to attach themselves to a sinking ship.
Right.
So this is the last question for you, Scott. I will turn off your microphones for a while because I see some resonation. So this is the last question for you, and after that we can develop any discussion if we want, if we have any time. So the question is, Scott, do you perceive any connection between Putin and the globalists? And who profits the most from war now, according to you? So I switch on your microphone.
You know, Vladimir Putin became president in the aftermath of the decade of the Yeltsin debacle. And I don't know if Europe is familiar with what happened in Russia in the 1990s, as it should have been, as it should be. Yeah, I get it. The Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia back then, a lot of bitterness about the Soviet era that dates back to 1968. Hell, it dates back prior to that, because I believe that there was a suppression of Czechoslovakian democracy in the 1940s. Some guy got pushed out of a window, I believe. So this, I get the fact that there was resentment, and maybe a lot of Czechs were dancing in the streets as they watched Russia suffer, because Russia suffered in the 1990s. But Russia was suffering not because of the failings of Russia per se, but because of the policies of the West, the exploitation of Russia by the West, using democracy or the promise of democracy as a mechanism of control. If you think that Russia was democratic in the 1990s, you don't know the definition of democracy, because democratic nations don't put tanks in the street, as Yeltsin did in October 1993, and fire upon their parliament, as Yeltsin did. Was this a free and independent Russia? No. Look at the cover of Time magazine in 1996, bragging that the United States bought the election to put Yeltsin back into power. I mean, you want to talk about electoral interference? America bought an election in Russia. We even admit it. We confess it. There's a lot of suffering. Yeltsin was a horrible leader, a despicable leader, a drunk, not up to the task. And his weaknesses were exploited by the West. The man that, and one of the things that occurred during that time was the rise of the oligarch class. That is, these Russian businessmen and former communist leaders who exploited the chaos in post-Soviet Russia to accumulate massive amounts of wealth, to enrich themselves and their cronies, and then they sent that wealth out of Russia into Europe. Putin inherited this. What was the man to do? Did he come in and say, "I'm a globalist. I'm here now to create a multipolar world"? And we're no. He said, "I got to fix Russia. That's my job, is to fix Russia." And there was a lot of problems in Russia. Remember, they had this little thing called the Chechen War in the early 2000s. That's a big deal back then. We tend to forget about it today. But Russia was embroiled in that. The economy was trashed, and Russia had to deal with the fact that the West didn't respect it. Look at the expansion of NATO. I mean, my God, what were they thinking? But they expanded, and so Putin was dealing with this, not the notion of creating a globalist response to America. That wasn't on the agenda when he first started. It was basically, how does Russia survive? How does Russia emerge from this situation? The first time that you hear a globalist vision out of Putin, I think, is around 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, one of the greatest political speeches ever given by anybody in modern history. I'd advise anybody watching this to go Google it and watch it. Not just the speech, but look at the way he answers the questions after the speech. This is a leader who is in control of his narrative, in control of his content, comfortable with the positions he's taking. and look at the discomfort of the people in the crowd, these masters of war that define NATO and Europe. John McCain shifting uncomfortably in his seat as Putin gives him the hard truth. But here Putin said that the age of the American singularity is over. I mean, he chastised Europe. He said, what have you done in Iraq? Have you even considered what you have done? And the answer is no, they didn't. Nobody considered it. But Putin did. And he said, the world can't operate this way anymore. The world can't allow the United States to dictate outcomes around the world. That the world has moved on. That this isn't post-World War II global geopolitics. This is a world that has mature nations that have to be taken into consideration. So there's going to be multipolarity. Russia is going to be one of those poles. China will be another. Other nations, Brazil will be a pole. and Putin put down the marker. But even then, he wasn't ready. He wasn't able to back his rhetoric up with meaningful action. He could position Russia to be stronger internally, but he hadn't yet perfected relations with China, perfected relations with the rest of the world. And it was an uphill struggle for him. You know what made it easy for him? The United States, because we're very good at getting everybody angry at us. I think the world just got tired of America always being at war with everybody. Either a shooting war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, the global war on terror, the never-ending conflict, or economic warfare. We sanctioned everybody. Everybody. Man, you wake up in the morning and put on the wrong clothes, we're going to sanction you. I'm being ridiculous here, but the point is, we were using sanctions as the response for everything. And in doing so, we alienated everybody, including our allies. Think about it for a second. We negotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, together with our European allies, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the European Union. These are our good friends. And we all agree this is a good deal until Donald Trump decides that it's not a good deal. And he withdraws from it. And then he starts sanctioning Europe for complying with its obligations under an agreement that they signed with Iran. How insane is that? Totally insane. He sanctions China for everything. He sanctions Russia for everything. We sanction everybody for everything. And the world is tired of being sanctioned. The world is tired of a rules-based international order. What does a rules-based international order mean? You're a lawyer. What are rules? They're not laws. Rules are agreements among people like a club. The rules, but it's not law. Laws are passed by elected representatives, ratified by legislative bodies. You know what a law, what law is? The United Nations Charter. That's a law. But we don't abide by the United Nations Charter because we're the United States. We make everybody else comply with it, but we do whatever we want to do because we've written the rules-based international order. Russia's done with that. China's done with that. India's done with that. The world's done with that. It's not that Putin was pushing a globalist agenda. The United States made the world embrace a globalist agenda because that is the appropriate response to unilateral American hegemony. It only makes sense for Russia to go down this path. When the United States and the West sanctioned Russia, they gave Putin the greatest gift ever. They destroyed the oligarch class. Destroyed it. They're gone. Putin doesn't have to worry about them anymore. In fact, Putin just kicked them all out. I don't know if you've been watching his speeches, but he gave a great speech where he said, get the hell out of Russia. Go fall in on your wealth, on your boats, on your yachts, on your, all the stuff that you stole from Russia. Go. Leave. Don't ever come back. We're done with you. This is a huge gift to Putin because he doesn't have to worry about the oligarchs anymore and the problems that they cause economically and politically. The other thing it did is, Putin always had to be worried about 25 to 30% of the Russian population, who were inextricably linked economically to the West. These are the people that had joint economic enterprises in the West. They were employees of Western companies, etc. But Putin couldn't divorce himself from the West because to do so in a sudden fashion would cause these people to rise up. And remember, it's a democracy in Russia. Even though Putin is a popular leader, if you get 30% of the population to turn on you, when you already have 30% of the population voting against you, that's 60%. And the last time I checked, that sort of wins elections. So the best way for Putin to lose the election would be to alienate the 30% of the Russian population that was linked to the West economically. What did the West do by imposing sanctions? An immediate economic divorce with Russia. Immediate economic divorce with Russia. And who's to blame? Putin. Putin's not to blame. The West is to blame. So there's no political downfall, no downside for these sanctions. These 30% are now angry at the West. They're rallying around Putin, who, because of his globalist agenda, now has alternatives to the West economically. Russia's doing business with India, with China, with the world. Look at Argentina signing deals with Russia. Look at Brazil. Look at everybody. And so Putin now is liberated from the West. He didn't cause this. The West caused it. So I have trouble when people say, Putin's globalist agenda. Putin is a leader who's looking out for the best interests of Russia. And right now, the best interests of Russia are defined by globalism, not because he said that's the model we have to embrace. It's because he was given no other option by the West, by Europe, by the United States, and the closing off of economic relations with Russia.
Thanks for that. I think we are just talking a lot of time and taking a lot of time from you. But one last question, because I have to ask it. It was a point of public debate, and kind of very strong point of the debate was that 13 biolabs that should have been placed in Ukraine. First, the media said there were no biolabs. Then, everybody saw the contract. Then Victoria Nuland admitted with Marco Rubio that there have been biolabs in Ukraine, and that they are actually afraid that Russia will take control of these biolabs. And then media came with another story that it's defensive biolabs, that they are not like producing biological weapons, but they were trying to research the defensive measures and protection against the bioweapons. So can you please give us your take, your opinion on this?
Very complicated question. And I say that not because I'm trying to dodge it. I'm just preparing you for the answer, because it's not an easy answer at all. When the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a great concern in the United States and indeed around the world about the status of the former Soviet chemical, biological, nuclear programs. Even their ballistic missile programs, we're going to sell this technology. How do you bring this under control? And it's not just about bringing the weapons under control. How about controlling the scientists, these very knowledgeable people who now are unemployed, in many cases unemployable. And, the fear was that they would take their knowledge and go elsewhere to other nations that might seek to acquire the capability to produce these horrible weapons. So we had senators, Senator Sam Nunn and Richard Lugar, came together and they passed something called the Nunn-Lugar Act, the cooperative threat reduction, where we would work together with not just Russia, but the former Soviet republics to bring these weapons capabilities under control. And as an important part of it, to create an employment vehicle for these scientists so that they could stay in Russia, have and have the ability to earn a meaningful salary and not sell their knowledge abroad. In Ukraine had some Soviet-era biological weapons laboratories. In 2005, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program through the Defense Threat Reduction Agency initiated a formal agreement with the Ukrainian government to bring these labs under the control of a joint collaboration between the Ukrainian government and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. So you'd bring these labs under control, and the key aspect of bringing them under control was to gain control of any deadly pathogens that might be stored there, and then to dispose of these pathogens, and then to repurpose the laboratory so that it could do gainful employment for these scientists. So they did that, but it didn't go down the way it's supposed to. And the reason why I say that is on the eve of the special military operation of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the head of the program, the biological program in Ukraine, the American head, and I don't know his name right now off the top of my head, but he gave a press conference where he said that there was concern that Russia could bomb these facilities and destroy some of the refrigeration capability, and that if the frozen samples thawed out, they could be released into the environment. And then he said something very interesting, that among the pathogens they were worried about were pathogens dating back to the Soviet biological weapons program. Now, wait a minute. America is a signatory to the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, which prohibits the acquisition and retention of prescribed biological agents. In 2005, the United States took over these labs together with, as part of a joint cooperation, which means they've assumed responsibility for any pathogen samples that exist there. Why in 2022 are we talking about the danger of these pathogen samples somehow being thawed out and released in the public? We didn't destroy them. We retained them. We acquired them. We violated the Biological Weapons Toxin Convention. So right off the bat, we have to understand that the United States does not comply with its treaty obligation. This isn't speculation. I just gave you the case. It's fact-based, admitted by the director of the program. He doesn't admit violating the treaty, but he basically laid out a fact set that says you violated the treaty. We also know that the United States historically has viewed defensive biological warfare research in a very broad manner. What I mean by that, to give you, again, another fact-based example. After 9/11, envelopes were mailed in the United States through the U.S. postal system that contained dry powdered anthrax. This was a big scandal. Investigations were carried out. It turns out that dry powdered anthrax was produced by the United States in Dugway, Utah, at a defensive biological research facility, where ironically they train civilian hazardous materials response technicians. Guess who was trained there? In how to operate under live biological agents. We do the same thing in Alabama. We train with a live sarin and live VX nerve agent. Because if you're going to respond to a chemical weapons incident, you should know how to respond in a live agent environment. You should be confident in your equipment, confident in your procedures. It's totally legitimate, except for the following. The same production capabilities that produce that small amount of sample that's used what defines an offensive biological weapons program? What defines an offensive chemical weapons program? It's not the existence of the agent, apparently, because we possess it. I guess it was the intent to use, but here we produced anthrax in dry powder form, and it was used as a terrorist weapon by somebody who got their hands on it. I can guarantee you that if Iraq in 1997 had said, we want a defensive biological weapons program, so we're going to build a lab that can produce anthrax, but don't worry about it. We're not going to attack you. We're just going to build the anthrax so that we can test our equipment and our procedures. We would have said, not just no, but hell no. We'll bomb you if you do that because you represent a threat against the world. Double standards. The United States, under the guise of defensive weapons of mass destruction research, are producing live agent, live sarin, live VX, live anthrax, live botulinum toxin, and other things. So again, the reason why I'm saying this is we need to understand that the American approach to biological research is one that there is no distinction between an offensive and defensive biological weapons capability, none whatsoever. So now we come to Ukraine. They have these labs. They're employing. Now we come to the ugly reality of the American defense contracting business. You see, Congress appropriates money. It's Congress that approves all of this. So somebody has to make a case to Congress that they need to appropriate American taxpayer dollars for purpose X, Y, and Z. So Congress gave a broad brush approval for programs designed to contain and control prior biological warfare programs. So that's why they authorized those first couple contracts to bring the Ukrainian biological programs under control. But now people have to come up with work for these scientists to do. What are they going to do? So now they got to appropriate more money. They need a job to do. Well, why not research local potential sources of future pandemics? So we need to have scientists that go out and collect information about this disease, that disease, etc. Okay, money was appropriated, the lab's built. Man, why don't we build a new lab? Instead of relying on these old labs, why don't we ask Congress to help us build a new lab to do this new work? Okay, they do that. Meanwhile, a defense contractor says, I'd like to look at maybe deprogramming solid rocket motors or something like that. And Congress says, no, we're not going to fund that. You see, if you don't get the funding, you're not making money. You're not much of a business. So they sit down and they go, well, wait a minute. We need to make money. What? Hey, boss, they're building biological labs in Ukraine like it's going out of style. Why don't we just come up with another reason to build a new biological lab? So they put together a proposal. They send the proposal in. It gets approved. It's sent to Congress. Bam, they fund it. So now you build another laboratory. But it has to have a work to do that's different from other. So you have to come up with other reasons to do things. So you expand your research. And remember, our definition of defensive biological lab is different from what the world would expect, because our defensive biological lab is really an offensive biological weapons research facility, because we're gathering actual agent and then we're testing how people could use it. Now, that's a theoretical model on what the enemy might do against us, but there's no difference. If we're testing how it's going to be used, it's an offensive biological weapon. And we built a whole bunch of these laboratories in Ukraine, and they were doing some really ridiculous stuff. And I will just say this about the way the defense contracting business works. They come up with every crazy idea in the book, and if you're going to fund it, they're going to do it. And so at some point in time, somebody thought it was a good idea to do research on bird flu that would be genetically modified only to address Russian Slavs, and it would be disseminated by putting it into migratory birds who only flew into Russia. Sounds a hell of a lot like an offensive biological weapons program to me that's focused on Russia. But we've called it defensive because we have an expansive definition of what defensive means. That's what was going on in Ukraine. Do I think that somebody in the United States said, we're going to build an offensive biological warfare facility? No. I think these people actually believed they were doing defensive biological warfare research, but their definition of what constituted defensive biological research is this is an expansive American definition, which is really an offensive biological warfare program. They just never thought they were going to get caught. They never thought anybody was going to ask the questions, because Congress is not asking the questions. Congress gave them the money. Who's holding them to account? The Ukrainian government? No, they're more than happy to receive the money too. Any journalists that come up, they're called Russian propagandists, disinformation specialists. There was a great journalist out of, I think, Bulgaria that was doing some fantastic research on this issue. Dismissed across the board, even though everything she said was true. The only reason why we're talking about this now is that Russia captured the damn laboratories, got a hold of the documents, and they're publishing the documents, and the documents are forcing people to ask some very uncomfortable questions, like just what the heck was going on in these labs. But you know who should be asking those questions? Congress. They're not. Why? Because the American people aren't demanding it of them. And that's the situation we're in right now. This is a very dangerous situation because we don't know exactly what was going on there. And I have to tell you that if I were the Russians reading these documents, I would not be happy at all. How could you ever again trust the United States if half of what they're saying is true? And there's no reason to believe that it's not true because the Russians have the documents. It's a very dangerous situation, very serious situation, a very embarrassing situation. As an American, I'm humiliated by this. This is not how we should be operating. This is amateur hour. This is not being the adult in the room. This is being a child who is given a toy and then use that toy in an irresponsible fashion. But that's my response to the question about the Ukrainian biolabs.
Maybe one last question then came from a Thank you, Tom. One question that was just popping up my mind. Sorry, it's for 4:40 in the morning in Czech Republic. If you are right now in the White House, the President of the United States, what would you do in order to, solve this conflict and somehow make things work properly? What would be your advice to the U.S. president?
First of all, this war has to come to an end. The number one priority is how to get this war to come to an end, which means you have to address the war in its different components. This isn't just about bringing the guns to a halt. This is about addressing the underlying reasons why the guns were fired in the first place. I would ask the president to reassess the expansion of NATO, and indeed reassess NATO as an alliance. I don't think I could advise the president to dissolve NATO. I think that's too radical at this point in time. Both the United States and Europe have invested too much into NATO, but I think NATO can be redefined back to a legitimate defensive alliance without this pretense of global ambition. I think NATO can be downgraded. It doesn't have to be, this earth-shattering, collective. NATO should just be a simple military alliance designed to protect the defensive interests of its constituents. That way you can, I think you could responsibly talk about the buildup of NATO military power without threatening people around the world. There doesn't need to be a 300,000 man rapid response force. What there needs to be is a German armor brigade that can actually function. There doesn't have to be, 4 deployed troops in Poland and the Baltic states. What there needs to be is a Czech military that can actually accomplish the mission that it's been given. I mean, think small. Do the basics first before you start being big. That actually makes you stronger than you think. But you don't, what do you have to defend yourself against? You're a defensive alliance against what? You don't have to create an enemy. In fact, you should be working to make sure you have no enemies. And that means that the relationship with Russia has to be rethought significantly. First of all, why is Russian energy a threat to Europe? As I indicated in an earlier part of our discussion, it's actually one of the greatest gifts Russia's given to Europe, because by providing Europe with a reliable source of cheap energy, Europe has saved hundreds of billions of dollars over the years that it's been able to reinvest into its infrastructure and its social welfare programs. It's a gift. Russia has given Europe a gift. Why is this a threat? Russia has never used energy as a weapon, never. That's only the hype put on by the United States. Russia earns money by being a reliable supplier of energy. So you're not a reliable supplier of energy if you're always threatening to turn off the switch. And Russia has never threatened to turn off the switch. Anytime Russia turned off the switch in the past, it was because of contractual problems, where they believed that a partner wasn't living up to its obligations. Indeed, Ukraine was on the receiving end of much of that. But what happened? In every instance, this went to a court of arbitration. And when the court made a ruling, even when that ruling was against Russia, what did Russia do? It complied with the ruling, because Russia is a nation that acts under the rule of law. That's not how somebody who uses energy as a weapon behaves. So this is a manufactured argument by Europe that is non-existent. And so I would, first of all, take the whole issue of Russian energy as a weapon off the table. I would tell the Europeans, I would tell the president to go to Europe and say, you enter into the energy contracts you need to enter into to have the best economic outcome for your people. That means you get to make the choice. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if the Czechs can take a look at the existing pipeline infrastructure and say, man, we can get Russian gas at X, but if we try to bring in LNG from the United States through French port, it's going to be X times 3. Let's go with X, guys. It's cheap. That makes sense. That makes sense. Then the other thing is NATO is going to have to figure out what its posture is going to be vis-a-vis Russia. The Russians have put a marker down that says that while they're not going to demand that people leave NATO, they want NATO infrastructure to be withdrawn back to 1997 levels. I can understand how politically that's going to be difficult to do because that's seen as surrendering to Russia. And that's a very difficult thing. But you know, you don't have to surrender to Russia. You just have to be smart. There used to be a treaty called the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty. And it was about reducing conventional forces to levels that A, didn't bankrupt each side. You didn't have to have 10,000 tanks each. And B, the force distribution was such that nobody was threatened by it. It was very difficult to talk about a surprise attack, etc. I could see the revival of a conventional forces in Europe type treaty that would achieve the Russian objective without being seen as a NATO surrender. So I would advise the president to try and revive meaningful conventional arms control. I would also immediately talk about reviving the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and expanding it to include these B-61 bombs and the F-35A fighters. You know, if Czech Republic at the end of the day wants to buy an F-35A fighter, it's your money. Do what you want. But I don't have to give you a nuclear weapon. Okay, I don't have to make your F-35As a nuclear delivery vehicle. Fact is, I should be seeking to eliminate all nuclear weapons in Europe. We should make Europe a nuclear-free zone, which means that the French and the British are going to have to come on board too. There really is no reason for an independent French strategic nuclear deterrent capability, and there's no reason for the British to have Trident nuclear submarines. If Russia and the United States can agree on deep nuclear cuts, then the French and the British should agree on getting rid of their nuclear weapons, and NATO should agree on getting rid of its nuclear umbrella. End of story. The best way to make Europe a viable continent is to make it a continent that people want to live in and work in. And people don't want to live and work in a nuclear target. People run away from that. Right now, Europe's one big nuclear target. So even if you get your economy back on up and running, as long as Russia is viewing you as a threat, understand that every morning you wake up with the potential of a life-ending nuclear apocalypse. So I would advise the president to work with my NATO allies to come up with a very realistic nuclear disarmament plan for Europe that also required Russia to make deep and meaningful cuts. I mean, if Europe eliminates its nuclear capability, Russia doesn't need to have so many nuclear weapons. And because Russia has such a great relationship with China, there's no reason for Russia to have all the nuclear weapons that it once possessed as well. We could see, you know, the reduction of strategic nuclear arsenals across the board to levels that you know, were unimaginable. You know, when we started building a nuclear arsenal, American military planners said we need 400 nuclear weapons to end the world. 400. Well, we got 1,500 plus. I think we could get this number down to, you know, 600, 500, maybe even 400 on each side. And that's good because now you're just one step away from zero. And that's an even better thing. But that's a little too pie in the sky right now. Let's deal responsibly. But I need to create a European security framework that Russia's comfortable with. We have to respect Russia's legitimate national security needs. That doesn't mean surrendering. It means creating something that's mutually beneficial. Does Germany really need to be spending 100 billion euros to rebuild its military? I don't think so. How expensive were these F-35A fighters for you guys? Pretty expensive. You don't have to give me the number.
$4 billion.
Isn't there things you can do with that money that's more productive to your society than spending it on an airplane that doesn't work, an airplane that only increases the threat to your nation? And all of Europe should view that. I'm not saying surrender. I'm not saying don't have a military. Every nation needs to have the ability to defend itself. But I am saying that you don't need a military capable of fighting Russia if you make Russia your friend. That's just a statement of fact, and that's the direction that people should be heading. That would be my advice to the president. And then lastly, I would say don't just pick up the phone and talk to Putin. Get on a damn airplane and go to Moscow. Okay? He's earned that. He's earned it. You go to him. You go to him. You meet him in Moscow. You sit down as equals and work this out like adults. Stare him eye to eye, not threatening him with sanctions, but saying, hey, I really do want to work out a peaceful solution to this. We recognize that our policies may not have been conducive to peace. We'd like to come up with policies that are conducive to peace for both Russia, the United States, Europe, and the world. Now, whether or not the president be willing to listen to this, remember, the president may agree with everything I just said, but he has to deal with a Congress that's not programmed to accept peace with Russia at this point in time. He has to deal with European allies that would view any meaningful effort towards establishing good relations with Russia as a sign of weakness. Like, why does Europe believe that the only way that you can be strong is to stand up to Russia? The actual way to make Europe stronger is to have good relations with Russia. That's the bottom line. Europe would be an economic powerhouse. They wouldn't be wasting money on a military that they can't use. Look at all the money you're spending on your military. You do know that if you use your military, they will all die because your military can't fight the Russians. And the only way you can fight the Russians is to escalate to nuclear conflict, and then we all die anyways. So why do you need to spend money on a military that can't be used? I'm not saying surrender. I'm not saying demilitarize. I'm saying being realistic in your military needs. What military does the Czech Republic need? Who threatens you? Russia doesn't threaten you. Who threatens you? Not too many people threaten you. So how big of a military do you really need? Do you really need those F-35A fighters? I don't think so. But that's, again, a question for the Czech to ask themselves.
Good question. Good question, to be honest. Scott, thank you very much for everything. I think Thomas has also exhausted all of the questions, and that we are coming to the end. It was a wonderful discussion. I must say I'm excited about your honesty and giving the expert opinions on all of the stuff that really matters to Czech Republic, to Europe, to the world. And it was real pleasure and a real honor to talk to you, Scott. So thank you very much for having you here.
Well, thank you very much, and hopefully I'll be able to meet you guys someday in a Prague bar, and we can have some of that delicious Czech Pilsner.
You're more than invited. You're more than invited. Anytime you're coming to Czech Republic, just give us a call, and we're there at the airport, pick you up, and bringing you to the best bar we have here.
Well, thank you very much.
If there's any development on this conflict, we would like to invite you again. So if you are,
I'm at your disposal. If you feel there's a need to talk, just call me up, and I'll be happy to talk with you anytime.
Thank you very much, Scott. I really appreciate it. Really.
It was my pleasure. Thanks.
I want to thank you as well, Scott. Thank you very much for your time and for everything. Henry, Jindro, thank you very much for providing this great opportunity. It is honor. Thanks both of you. And for you, all listeners, you were watching us all the time. This video has, I think, more than 2 hours. So I hope it was not exhausting for you and you got a lot of information, a lot of new statements, a lot of, perspective from someone whose career is enormous. Scott worked in this field for many years, has many experience. So Scott, once more again, thank you very much for sharing everything openly with us. I hope that people in the Czech Republic will share this idea. So please share this interview with other people. Maybe they will not agree with everything. It's okay. That's how it works. You can discuss everything below, write your opinion. Everything is welcomed here, guys. Okay, every opinion is welcomed. And that's I think all for now. We are in different times. Here in Vietnam, it's right now, I'll tell you, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I think that Henry, you have 5 o'clock in the morning. So I admire you. You're so amazing. How you can look like this at 5 in the morning. And Scott, your time, I think, is around 12 o'clock p.m. 11 p.m. in
11, yeah, 11. I'm an old man, 11, so I got to get my beauty sleep.
So you see that we really, yeah.
I would say just in the end, when you said that every discussion is welcome, obviously, I think the discussion is critical to everything that we are talking here. I think Scott even challenged you to think about it, to doubt it, to question it. But I think the most important thing is to start to use this computer, as Scott said, and think for yourself, not to be just told what you should think. Think for yourself. That's the most important thing that there is. Like I think it's important for every matter, not only for this war conflict, but for everything around you.
It's funny. We are on different continents, but I can wish to all of us good night. So thank you very much, and thank you all the audience for watching us. Thank you for subscribe. Thank you for sharing. For any comments, I'll try to answer you. We will see how many there will be. So thank you very much, and once more again, see you next time.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it. Thank you.